Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at Ironhack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And today we have Thijs with us. But Thijs, are you prepared to engage?
I am, absolutely.
Let's do this because Thijs is today with us because he is an expert in using gaming techniques for learning and changing behavior. And as an international speaker, he talks to business leaders and managers worldwide about the impact of playful learning. In 2017, he also founded his latest startup venture, which is called Warp VR, which is a company that revolutionizes how people train by combining learning, gaming, and virtual reality. So Thijs, I don't know if there's anything that I'm missing from that intro, if I said your name decently or at least understandably for you or not, or if there's anything else you want to add as well.
No, absolutely. You did it perfect. So name is all good.
That's fantastic then. So Thijs, is there anything else you want to mention about the company? I don't know what you're doing currently before we take off.
Yeah, of course. I can explain a little bit about the company and what we're currently doing. So as you already said, I founded this company together with two other co-founders in 2017. It was actually coming from my work as a gamification consultant, which I did for a couple of years and advised and helped startups, but as well as bigger corporates in using game thinking and game-based solutions for, some of their problems. Could be teaching employees about certain procedures, but also activating consumers to be using, products more and more. But mainly in that area of training and learning, also kind of changing behavior, I noticed we could do a little bit more. So I came in touch with VR as a technology, found it hugely interesting. And together with my co-founders, we did some experiments, seeing what we could do combining VR technology and game-based learning. And that was, so interesting. We did a couple of projects for some different clients, and they were all like, okay, this is amazing. We need to invest more time, more resources into this to see, what we can do with this and how we can, truly help our employees learn more, learn better. So that kind of convinced us to start this into a business. So that's Warp VR. And with Warp VR, we are a SaaS solution. We work B2B. And we've got a platform that helps clients in creating, but also distributing and analyzing VR training scenarios. And we all do this with 360 video and storytelling, which is an important game mechanic we use. And, clients can create these VR training scenarios and make sure the employees can play them on, smartphones, but also on standalone VR headsets. A lot of fun to do. So we're doing this for some really cool clients. And there, I also noticed that, the whole, let's say, game-based aspect really works when you combine it well with, in this case, training and VR as a technology.
That's amazing, Thijs. And we would like to know, because you've talked about the company, you've talked about, meeting with all these clients and doing all these amazing things, but we would like to know more sort of on a more down-to-earth thing. Like, what are you doing regularly? What's your life look like in a day or in a week? Can you give us a little bit of insights into what Thijs is doing regularly?
Yes, absolutely. It's directly a bit of a difficult question, as in managing, a startup, being one of the founders means that there's a lot of different things to do. So we're still a pretty young company, so which, I guess means that you're still doing quite a bit. So it's, legal work, strategy, managing, sales, marketing. But I would say that the most fun I have is in designing, so making sure that the products we have work good, look good, are easy to use. So we can, get as many employees of our clients using the product and making sure that they can play the VR training scenarios. But I also love really talking to clients and see how they're using our products and making sure that we can help them in the best way possible. And also there, very often in the whole process of creating these, we call them training scenarios. I love, thinking with them on what the narrative could be, and what the game-based aspect could be, and where the, let's say, interesting dilemmas are in those training scenarios, where it can get hard for employees to make choices. So that whole process is really interesting to do.
Sounds very, very exciting. I, as you know, and the engagers know, I also come from the learning space, and, combining gamification, games-based learning, and all these things in, interesting dilemmas, interesting situations is always something that is very, very exciting. At least for me, maybe I'm just a geek.
Yeah, probably I am as well. But definitely it is, yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Thijs, we would like to get into sort of, you mentioned storytelling. And so we would like to get into story mode right now, because you've been in the space for quite a while. Then you founded a company as well. And I'm sure you've had the very good times, and you've mentioned, how good things have been going as well. But you've also had some difficult times. So we would like to know of a time where, things didn't go your way, or what you would maybe like to call your favorite failure when creating one of these games or gamified solutions or game-based solutions, whatever you want to go for, because we want to sort of be there with you and learn some of those lessons that you took out of that experience.
Yes, good question. I think in some way you fail every day. Being an entrepreneur, I think, would equal failure at some point. I mean, you learn so much, but you learn because of failure. Every single failure is actually a learning moment. And I think, that's why games are interesting, because you do a lot of failure while you're playing games, right? There's a lot of frustration. So each time you just don't make that level, you fail, but you learn, you get up, and, you do it again until you succeed. And I think I have that in my work, quite a bit. Eventually you're doing a lot of things, you don't know how to do them, you just try them. Sometimes you win directly, sometimes you fail. But there's that one specific moment I think would be nice to share, which is, from a long time ago. It's actually my graduation, which is, 10, 11, 12 years ago. And I can remember that when I did my graduation project, which was kind of a project I really didn't want to do, but I did anyway, because, I don't know, somebody told me to do it. And I can remember that my professor at the time was telling me that in order to, make people really enthusiastic about what you've done, you have to be, let's say, twice as enthusiastic yourself. And I wasn't about my graduation project, right? So I wasn't that, I wasn't really inspired on that project. So I couldn't really convey that message. I couldn't, inspire others because I wasn't inspired myself. So I've really learned from that project, that whole process, that you can only inspire people if you're doing what you truly believe in. And for me, that's really important. So every day, if I do what I truly believe in, then it's really okay to fail, Then I know I can learn from it. And in that process, I can inspire others as well. So for me, that's kind of a key moment. At that time, I truly saw it as failure, but now I can take lessons from it.
Makes sense. And if you were to face a similar situation in the near future, what would you do different? Like, how would you approach it maybe a little bit different to, have a different either outcome or a different attitude? What would be some key things that you would do in a different way?
I think to fail, often. So I think it would be good to, so I think that's what I'm currently doing, is trying to get into a process where you're trying things, get them out there. And if they're not good, then it's all fine. You can fail because, if it fails, only a small part of it will fail. Then you can learn from it and you can do it over again and improve. So that's really something, it's kind of, I don't know, some people call it startup mindset, but I think that's really what we're trying to do as well. It's what I'm trying to do is, although I don't know every single detail of, I don't know, could be even a contract, could be a workshop with a client, could be design aspects, still really try to do it, be prepared for the fact that you could fail and think that it's okay to do so, and then try to improve.
Makes sense. There you go. So that would be a different approach to fail, sort of, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's like fail often or something like that. Fail often, right? That's
Exactly.
a phrase.
Yeah. True.
Catchphrase.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Makes sense. And I think it's important for us to remember that. And we were talking in the pre-interview chat of how important it is for education as well, for kids to understand that failing is okay and you can get up from that. And it's a lesson we take from games. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you look at games, I think the best games actually are the games where you fail more than you win. And yeah, it's actually, if you think about it,
Dark Souls.
Yeah, it might be a bit crazy, but even very popular mobile games, things like Angry Birds, for instance, there's far more failure than there is success. I mean, often you play levels 4 or 5 times before you actually succeed in seeing it through all the way. And that that frustration of failure, failure can definitely be frustrating, but I think it's absolutely necessary, and even to some degree, of course, but the more frustration, the better the feeling of winning.
Yeah.
So I think it's always really important. It's something I always look into also when designing these training scenarios for our clients, to make sure that there are not walks in the park. It should be difficult. It should be frustrating. Otherwise, it's too easy and it's not fun. You need frustration and fun go hand in hand.
Yes, difficulty, frustration, all those things are part of fun for sure. Like Nicole Lazaro with hard fun and those kinds of things.
Exactly.
I completely agree. And we talked about this difficult challenge that you faced, and it didn't go well, but I'm sure many other things have gone well. So we would like to shift into a story like that one, like something that you went for and it went well. One of those maybe proud stories that you have that you would like to share with the audience.
Ooh, it's also a good question. Yeah, I think many things we were doing went well. I mean, we've got some amazing clients. It's always, for me, it's actually always difficult to, let's say, stand still and be, celebrate whatever we achieved, whatever I achieved. I always keep on going. Absolutely. And I always forget. So I always keep on going and just, go on, forget celebrating. But, eventually I'm also very proud of where I've come this far. So also as an entrepreneur, doing this business, doing this startup, eventually it's all choices combined led to, let's say this moment. And I'm very happy to truly help people in learning and therefore applying, new skills to improve their lives. And that really is what gets me going.
That sounds fantastic. And is there any, I don't know, maybe there's a time of a project or even the startup itself that you remember, one of those tough moments and you actually were able to pull through? Because maybe we can take a few lessons of the success that you had. That would be pretty interesting as well.
There's one very cool anecdote I think I could share about a client and a project we did. And it had to do with a bank robbery. So we did this for obviously a financial institution, and we filmed a bank robbery, and we did a training scenario. We made a VR training scenario for a bank robbery, and one of the employees of that bank was playing that training scenario, and he actually got into a robbery situation. I think 2 or 3 weeks after playing that VR training scenario. And in the training, you learn how to respond, when such a thing happens. It's obviously quite an emotional event. You can't prepare for such an event, but you never know how you truly react, when something like that happens. And he actually told us afterwards, or at least that's what we've heard from the client, that he was more calm and more relaxed because he did the VR training. So I was very proud there that we, together with the client created that training scenario, and that there was, true, real evidence of an employee who we affected, his life, and made sure that he was more relaxed and
safer because he was more relaxed for sure.
Absolutely.
VR and in general simulations, I think they have their way of helping you experience something so that when it happens again, like when you experience something many times, the next time if it happens in real life, there are better chances of you, not reacting so emotionally as you would, because it kind of could start forming part of your of your experience, so to speak, even if it wasn't real. And I'm guessing that VR has a lot to do with that.
Absolutely. I think, VR can get really close to the emotion, which you would probably feel when such an event would occur. And if you can attach, let's say, already on forehand, those procedures with that specific emotion, I believe it's easier to, recognize that situation if it happens in real life, and you know what to do because you've been there before. You've been very close to that real life situation, so you know what to do.
So your reflex are already there, ready to react in that sense. And Thijs, you've mentioned, again, you've done this for quite a while. You've had all these experiences. This one sounds like a fantastic one, the bank robbery. When you are about to face a new project that involves, VR, as you're doing currently, and, of course, designing, using maybe some game mechanics, maybe some gamification or not, how do you approach this? Like, do you have a series of steps, a process? How do you go about this when you're facing a client?
Yes, absolutely. We definitely have a process, and I think so. Also, in this business, but also in all the projects I did before this startup, if you design games, well, specifically serious games, or which is a bit of a strange term, but applied games or gamification solutions. Let's say normally when you would design games specifically, let's say for entertainment purposes, obviously you can learn a lot from them. But the main goal would be to, entertain people, to make sure that they have a good time. I think that there's the only difference when you are designing game-based solutions or, really applied games, is that, eventually the learning goal. So what is it, in our case, it's a learning goal. What is it that employees really need to learn? That actually comes first. So that's always a starting point for us. But directly afterwards, we actually design the game goal. So for us, the learning goal and the game goal are two different things. So the learning goal would be, what have you learned after taking off the VR headset in this case? But the game goal is what happens in the game, what happens in the scenario, what's the goal in the scenario. And especially that one can be very, very strong. So what we always do, we work with a lot of narrative, and narrative can be connected to a game goal very well. You can put people into a certain situation, make sure it feels very real, and then give them an assignment to do, which eventually is that game goal. So for us, that process of figuring out what's the learning goal, what do people need to learn, but then what's the narrative, that's, far often, I think, a very important game mechanic. And I think actually one that is too often overlooked in applied games. We come up with that narrative and that game goal. And from that moment on, we are trying to really look for, what are interesting dilemmas we can give to the player. Like at what points in that narrative and that storyline can it get pretty difficult for the player to make choices. And the more difficult it gets for that player to make choices, the more interesting the scenario is.
Yeah, interesting, relevant choices. That's super important in games, because if the right option is always too obvious, then it's not really a choice, right?
Absolutely, yeah. No, true. So it should have the right level of difficulty, indeed.
Makes sense.
Just a quick break before we continue with this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate if you share it with your friends and family and on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's @RobAlvarezB and the hashtag ProfessorGame, all one word. And in Facebook, you can find the Professor Game page. Thanks in advance for your engagement.
And Thijs, you again, with all this experience with the projects that you worked on, you probably have come through with many different ways of doing things. And would you say that there is some sort of, best practice or something that you say, well, when you're approaching a project that involves games, you probably should be thinking about these things, and that would benefit the project as a whole? No silver bullet, but something that in general helps make projects a little bit better.
I don't know. Eventually, I think that might be a bit of a strange thing with designing games, is that in a certain way, I believe that everyone is actually a game designer. I can remember I did a lot of workshops back in the days for educators of primary and secondary educational institutions. And during these workshops, I always try to gamify the material they would use in their classrooms, for the students. And every single one told me, I'm not a game designer. I cannot gamify, my math lesson. And I was always like, okay, I'm going to teach you. And in 2 hours from now, you've designed a game and it's actually a good game. And that always worked because, people can think in terms of games somehow. And the main point I always gave them is to think about games they already know. And every single person knows a game or has a favorite game. It could be a card game, could be a board game, could be a video game. But everybody knows some sort of a game they've played and enjoyed playing that game. And then I ask people, what's your favorite game? And they would tell me, well, I don't have a favorite game. I only do Sudokus in the local newspaper. And I'm like, there you go. That's your favorite game. And using that as a starting point can be very valuable for, at least getting that brainstorm going on, what can we do as a game-based solution for this challenge? So I think there, it's quite easy to come up with a game concept, but I think it's very hard to really master, game design, let's say, in order to make really good games. I mean, that costs a tremendous amount of time and a lot of play testing in order to get it really right.
Makes sense. So that best practice is thinking of yourself as a game designer and, trying and failing, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, also there, a lot of failing indeed, but quick failing. So fail fast. Trying to design something, think of any game you already know, make sure that it fits the challenge you currently have, directly build it on paper. It can be as simple as you can, as possible. And play test, you can already after 30 minutes or so, you can put something on paper and play test, and then use that to go into the next design phase, let's say, and improve.
Yes, absolutely. Let's do that. Sounds very exciting. And Thijs, you've gone through a good part of the interview by now. I don't know if somebody comes to your head and say, oh, this person, I would really like to listen to this person in the podcast. So it's kind of a suggestion for a future guest or maybe a past guest as well. Does anybody come to your mind when I say this?
Absolutely. One of the companies I worked as a gamification consultant was Woo Sports. And Woo Sports is a startup. Well, it was back in the days, it was a startup. So they're already in business for a couple of years. And what they have is they sell a small sensor, and it's being used for kiteboarding. So, with kite on, with a board and a big kite, you go out on the sea, you do all kinds of tricks. And that sensor would actually measure what you were doing, how high you were jumping, the amount of airtime, etc. So there's a lot of variables there to create a really cool gamified, solution. It's kind of real life gaming. It's like Strava, but then for kiteboarding. So I did some work for them in the beginning when they were setting up their business. And the founder of Woo Sports, he's called Leo König, is a guy from Germany. I think he would be very interested in talking to you, and I would be very interested in hearing him in this podcast.
Interesting. Sounds like a very, very good suggestion. I had never heard of this company or this founder either. It sounds like a very interesting guest to have in the future as well.
Absolutely. It's a very cool company.
And keeping up with the recommendations, Thijs, if you had to recommend just one book, what book would you recommend to the engagers, this audience, and why?
Just one book? Well, there are so many. Let me recommend the book I'm currently reading. I think that would be good.
Sure.
It's a book written by the founder of Patagonia, the clothing brand.
Yep.
The book is called Let My People Go Surfing. Well, I surf as well. That's mainly why I was attracted to that book. But the whole, let's say, philosophy of that Patagonia founder is really, truly great. So he really sees working as part of life. So for him, there's no work and then play and then being at home, so it's all combined, and you have to make sure you make the best out of let's say every hour you have. So working should be fun, so he really sets up his business in such a way that every single employee can maximize what he or she is good at, but also make sure that there's a lot of fun in working. And when there's no time for working, for instance, because there are very good waves out there, everybody, can close their computer and just go out there and go into the sea to go surfing. So kind of the whole atmosphere, the whole lifestyle, that's something I truly love. And Yeah, I think there's a connection with games as well. Making sure it's fun, hard fun. You should work, but there should also be time for fun.
Makes sense.
I really love that book.
Absolutely. Sounds pretty interesting. I haven't even heard of the book. I've heard of the brand for sure. In fact, I use some references of that brand for some of my classes on supply chain. So I definitely heard of them, but I hadn't heard of the book. So it sounds interesting.
It's a really interesting book. Yeah.
And, you've recommended other people, the other guests, books. But in your case, what would you say is your superpower, that sweet spot, that thing that you do at least better than most other people?
I think I'm let's say more of a generalist than a specialist. So I think my superpower would be that in a design process of creating a game, very early on I could get a very good idea on how the game is going to be like, so how it's going to work, if it's going to be good or not. I would say I've got a good overview of all the different elements, so all the different game mechanics, but also kind of the narrative, the design, but also the feasibility of what we're creating. Is it too big? Is it going to work? Is it scalable? Can it be played by many? So I think I'm really good at that, making sure that early in the process, we can already figure out, whether it's going to work or not.
Sure. That is absolutely a superpower. Some people might have something similar to that, and it doesn't have to be absolutely unique, but it does sound like very, very useful, especially for this space.
Yeah.
And Thijs, now comes probably one of the most difficult questions, and has to do with what is your favorite game?
Oh, that is a difficult question. Well, let me mention at least one VR game. Obviously I'm doing a lot of VR. Which is, maybe the most well-known VR game, but that's probably because it's really good, which is Beat Saber. I really love, after a hard day's work, put on my Oculus Quest 2 and then play some Beat Saber at home. Eventually that's it's a good workout, let's say. You can really get into that game, so I truly love that. But I think eventually the games I love most are kind of the puzzle adventures, so things, the Room game series on smartphone. Those games I really love. So there are a couple of games they made, all called The Room, where you are kind of in a 3D environment. You really have to solve all these puzzles. So it's kind of an escape room kind of concept. I truly love those kind of games. It's kind of a puzzle. You need to think, you need to solve in order to proceed.
Interesting games for sure. So Thijs, we're running out of time, but I don't want to let you go before you give us, whatever final piece of advice you want to throw in. And of course, let us know where we can find you. How can we connect with you? Where can we know more about you, about Warp VR? Like, this is sort of the plug zone, if you want to call it that way.
Yeah, I think, if you want to get into the space, let's say, or of games or game-based solutions, gamified solutions, I think a good starting point is always to start from a game So, use Scrabble, Sudoku already mentioned, maybe Mario Kart, maybe Beat Saber. Think of those games in order to start working on a certain challenge you have. So maybe within your company, you're thinking, okay, I want to use games or gamified solutions in order to, motivate employees or making sure that people are doing some sort of a procedure. It's always a good starting point to start from games you already know and work from there. So I think that would be quick advice, let's say, for listeners who really want to get into game-based solutions.
Great. And where can we find out more about Thijs and Warp VR?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. For instance, just search for my name. Definitely also on Twitter, Thijs de Vries as a handle. I love to talk to everyone regarding games, game-based solutions, also VR or VR training. And if you're interested indeed in my company, Warp VR, and what we're doing, please go to warpvr.com.
Pretty straightforward. Makes sense. And if you don't know how to spell Thijs' name, I can completely feel your difficulty. If you're not Dutch, you probably have a hard time on that. You will find it on professorgame.com. You'll just look for Thijs, so Thjis. Is that correct?
It's Thijs.
Thijs. There you go. I'm already making the first mistake. But there you can just search for that, and you'll find all the links to, Twitter, to LinkedIn, everything else. Or you can just directly go into that social media and find Thijs right there. And Thijs, thank you very much for investing this time. I know it's a late night at home for you as well. So thank you very much for taking this time, this opportunity to talk to the engagers, to give your knowledge, your insights. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this interview with Thijs. And, if you have any kinds of questions that you would like to ask other guests, future guests, all you have to do is go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. If it is selected, and you have pretty good chances, it will come up in a future episode and you will get your answer live in an episode. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, before you click continue, remember to subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.